Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us as we take you on a new adventure aboard the Ocean Emerald. I'm Steve Travali, and I'll be your narrator as we travel the majestic sea and experience many new wonders. Every week, I'll randomly draw a pre-specified number of participants who will meet their unfortunate demise. This will be recorded, and these participants will be notified by email. Now sit back, relax if you can, and let's begin our journey. The Optimistic Survivor, Nightmare Cruise. The following work of fiction has been written for entertainment purposes only and is not meant to be offensive in any way. Episode 1, 16 Dead. It was August of 1924, and down at the docks the air was buzzing with excitement. Engines puffed and ropes tugged as derricks lifted heavy freight of every kind, stowing it onto ships. Seamen gave the final spit and polish to brass railings as cabin boys and porters delivered an unending procession of suitcases and trunks to staterooms. Captain William Franks found these predictable routines quite comforting, everything ticking away like clockwork, just as it should be. It wouldn't be long now before the luxurious steamship, Ocean Emerald, would depart on another 2-week voyage. Franks, a tall, distinguished man with slightly graying hair and a no-nonsense attitude, stood on the ship's bridge dealing with last-minute items. He was a seasoned captain of impeccable record who had successfully piloted this ship for several years. As poised senior crew members assumed their posts with welcoming smiles, Franks took a moment away from his busy preparations to watch the latest group of passengers boarding the Ocean Emerald. He sighed to himself. Before the ship departed, he would have to leave the familiarity of the bridge and make a brief appearance to introduce himself and welcome the 184 rich and famous guests who would be cruising in luxury with him over the next 2 weeks. It was by far the least enjoyable part of his job. He quite preferred attending to the ship and keeping his interactions with the passengers to a minimum. It could only be hoped, after performing his obligatory chore, he could return to the bridge as quickly as propriety would allow. It could only be hoped that this newest group of guests would not cause any problems and leave him in peace to do his job. The Ocean Emerald sounded one long blast of her horn at precisely 5 p.m. With loud cheering and waving from both passengers and the crowd on the dock below, she gracefully began her departure. The evening was beautiful and the water calm. As the ship slowly steamed away, guests were treated to the wonderful scene of the city's passing panorama. On deck, people mingled and made introductions as the ship headed toward the open sea. But once the city began to fade in the distance, groups slowly began drifting away to their staterooms to prepare themselves for dinner. A bugle call at 7 p.m. announced that dinner was served. The passengers, dressed in elegant evening attire, filed into the beautifully appointed dining room. Stewards stood behind their chairs, ready to seat them at tables draped in white linen and set with the finest silver, crystal, and china. The introductions and conversation resumed. Then, with great aplomb, a famous politician stood and tapped on his glass until all was quiet. Raising it in the air, he proposed a toast to a safe voyage. The company all raised their champagne glasses in unison and echoed, "To a safe voyage." As if on cue, smartly dressed table stewards emerged from the galley, carrying warm bowls of seafood bisque, the first of 7 courses. As dinner progressed, Captain Franks received a report from Robert Culverton, the first mate, that all was well and the guests were enjoying themselves. The captain gave him a curt nod and wondered to himself how in heaven they could not be, since they were being waited upon hand and foot aboard the most luxurious ship that money could buy. Then he relented. It was good news that everyone had settled in, and he had not yet received any complaints. You could never tell what ridiculous issues the rich and full of themselves might have. He was pleased with his well-trained crew, who were obviously staying well ahead of any problems. Following the dinner service, guests moved to the lounge to enjoy coffee and cigars. Later, Robert, the first mate, invited everyone to gather in the Neptune Theater for the evening's entertainment. Performing tonight was a talented illusionist. To the delight of the audience, his performance was nothing short of amazing and produced much oohing and awing from the crowd. Some of the more delicate ladies were near to fainting when a pretty assistant was sawn in half. As the passengers exited the show, there was plenty of speculation as to how the illusionist could have possibly orchestrated such astonishing tricks. It had been an exciting day, and a few of the older guests were ready to retire for the evening, but the others headed for the ballroom to dance the night away to the music of the lively jazz band. Throughout the night, the Ocean Emerald increased her speed, steadily putting more miles between herself and the shore. The weather held steady, and the passengers slept peacefully. The following day provided guests with more spirited entertainment in the form of squash, swimming, shuffleboard, and deck tennis. One could also take advantage of the gymnasium filled with a variety of training apparatus, or quieter time could be spent in the reading and writing room, composing letters to friends and family back home. Of course, staff were always nearby to fulfill any other needs. A most enjoyable day was had by all. Before they knew it, the dinner hour was fast approaching once again. For the main course this evening, the chef had chosen Japanese tiger fish, also known as fugu sashimi, a Japanese delicacy. It was a new and appetizing dish, accompanied by a dipping sauce. The passengers loved it and sent their compliments to the chef. It was just an hour later when the first passenger reported to sickbay with severe cramps, nausea, and vomiting. Dr. Peter Mueller, the only doctor on board, found himself quickly overwhelmed by an onslaught of patients complaining of identical symptoms. The usually competent doctor was sorrowfully unprepared to handle the growing number of sick. And to make matters worse, the ship was now far from shore and a much-needed hospital. With trembling hands, the doctor called the bridge and asked to speak to the captain. He quickly relayed the scene that was unfolding in sickbay. By the time the source of illness was identified, a large number of people were suffering from all degrees of food poisoning. Dr. Mueller had determined that blowfish, while a delicacy, is highly toxic if the fish's organs are not removed correctly, and it seems they had not been. The captain placed his cap firmly on his head, and together with Robert, the first mate, they headed directly for the galley. He needed to find out exactly what happened in the kitchen and then calm the passengers. The captain rolled his eyes at the thought of that. By the next morning, 16 passengers had died of food poisoning. The captain met with the normally high-strung and now very distressed doctor in sickbay to confirm the identities of the deceased. Dr. Mueller told him that the first two passengers to succumb were Stanley Wellington, a rich industrialist, number 84, and his much younger mistress, Madeline, number 119. That will set tongues wagging, thought the captain. Wellington always made a spectacle of himself chasing after young girls. Then there were the three famous and much adored accordion-playing brothers, the Marconis, Ernesto, Valentino, and Victor. Number 163, number 158, and number 133, along with their manager Guido, number 162. Now that was a true loss to the world, thought the captain, who was quite a fan of their famous accordion music. Also among the dead was Peter Smith, the owner of the large daily newspaper, the Morning Chronicle. Number 5, a rather mediocre publication in the captain's opinion, and his oldest son, Peter Jr., number 105, as well as both the president and vice president of a prestigious hotel chain. Number 106, and number 57. Dr. Mueller reported with some relief that the infamous mobster, Tough Tony, nicknamed that because he had been shot on 2 separate occasions and survived, was one of the casualties. Number 51. Not quite as tough as we all thought, said the captain. He had been a bit worried about what rough stuff Tough Tony might get up to while on board. Sadly departed were 2 gold medal winning athletes of the 1924 men's Olympic polo team, number 156 and number 9. And the famous flapper and it girl of the time, Louise Brooks, who popularized women's trousers, something which the captain greatly disapproved of. And she was number 21. The last of the deceased was Howard Schmaltz, a prominent distillery owner, and his wife Gertrude. Number 141 and number 178. The distillery owner and his wife, who during these times of prohibition made most of their money smuggling liquor illegally. To everyone's delight, they had supplied the ship with more than enough to last the voyage. So many dead in such a short time. Captain Franks realized with a sinking stomach that what had happened here was a calamity of the highest order. 16 rich and famous people were dead. It would be impossible to just sweep these deaths under the carpet. Franks reflected on his sterling reputation as a captain. What would this do to his career? It really was most distressing. His mind began to spin, knowing that as captain, he was ultimately held responsible for everyone else's mistakes. Mistakes like this one that were just simply beyond his control. What rubbish. The captain had the same feeling about the other ridiculous rule, the one that said that he had to be the last one to go down with the ship, as if the ship he was a captain of would ever go down. At this point, he could not possibly turn the Ocean Emerald around. He had a schedule to keep. However, he knew repercussions were sure to follow when they arrived at port. Ships were so much simpler to deal with than people, who could be such a blasted nuisance. Captain Franks was determined to regain control of the situation. But, unfortunately, the poor captain had no idea that this was only the beginning.